Hi, and now to bring this to an end, we are going to talk about linking that FBA to the behavior intervention plan. You've got a lot of information on this already. We reviewed the concepts, we've looked at the competing pathways model, but I just want to make sure you're clear on how you're to take this process and move it forward. All right, so you have your FBA, correct? The information from your functional behavior assessment allows you to create a hypothesis for the function of the behavior. You can define your interfering behavior and your desired or replacement behaviors. Now, what do you have to consider? You've got that replacement behavior and you have to think, can the student perform that replacement behavior? You know, there's a difference between the declarative knowledge and the procedural knowledge. So even if the student knows what the other behavior is or could point out someone else engaging in the replacement behavior, it takes a different set of skills to perform that behavior. So you need to make sure not only does the student know replacement behavior is, but then can they actually do it? You need to see if they can actually do it. That doesn't mean that is written off if they can't do it. Of course, we're going to have to teach them. We also have to think about when is that replacement behavior going to occur. Students have to discriminate when and when not to use that replacement behavior, right? And that's where discriminative stimuli come in. So when around peers, the student isn't expected to raise his hand to ask a question, but when the teacher asks a question to the class, that's the SD for raising your hand, and that should indicate he will get reinforced, some scheduled reinforcement for raising his hand. That means he gets called on every now and then. He's not completely ignored, or else guess what? Hand raising goes under extinction. And then you want to teach and define the specific conditions to perform that replacement behavior. You have to teach that to them. So make sure you understand that not only do they need to be taught what and how to do it, they need to know when and when not to do it. All right, so once we've kind of figured out that whole replacement behavior, of course, the interfering behavior is going to get ignored as much as possible. We have to think about how can we change the environment in order to set the stage for that behavior to occur. We want to set up that motivation for the replacement behavior to occur because it's going to be a more efficient way of accessing reinforcement, and we want that inappropriate interfering behavior not to occur. So we want our environment to make it so that that is not an effective way to get a reinforcement. It's not going to happen, so don't even try. So you were thinking about your room arrangement. You got to think about how your instruction is planned out, how your scaffolding information, scaffolding materials, any other factors that trigger that interfering behavior that might promote the replacement behavior. All right, so you can reference that environmental checklist or any other evidence-based practices that you are aware of. All right, now we've got to plan. All right, you want to adjust your antecedents, providing opportunities for that replacement behavior to occur. Think about how are you going to prompt the student? What cues are they going to have? And that is where your self-management can come in. So you don't want to have to always be the one prompting the student. It becomes unnatural. It is cumbersome for you to do as a teacher. So you want to make sure that they have some kind of strategy. You've got the prompts posted visually so you don't have to actually tell the student, or you can just prime them at the beginning of class. These are my expectations. This is what's going to happen. Go. Okay? Because we want to increase the probability of success, and we actually don't want to remove all the barriers for failure because we want that student to be successful because that means they can access natural reinforcement and therefore that behavior will continue. So that's important. And then, of course, reinforcing that replacement behavior has to go along with not reinforcing the interfering behavior. But that's extinction. So just know that that extinction burst might happen. But you're going to have to push through it and plan for that. All right, so let's look at this competing pathways model. So we had Pete as an example. And what motivates him to want attention? Well, he's had little attention. His good friends are absent a lot, and he has poor social skills. Well, he doesn't have a lot of friends other than the one or two that have been irregular in attendance. Now, what triggers this behavior, attention-seeking behavior? Well, it is specific instructions to complete independent seat work, no choice, or whole group instruction. So again, no opportunity to socialize. So what is he doing? He is using profanity. What does the teacher want him to do? Ultimately, she just wants him to stay on task, finish his work without complaints or making inappropriate profanity comments. The replacement would be to properly recruit attention rather than use profanity. So the FBA indicated that the profanity was maintained by teacher attention and peer attention, and we need to give him that when he recruits appropriate peer attention. But if he did the desired behavior, we want more natural consequences, so we're going to want him to earn praise and maybe points if that's something that is typical across classes. So sure, you've got your competing pathways model. You've got a hypothesis of the function of the behavior and what is motivating and triggering that behavior. But how do we use that to plan? Well, we already know, because we covered earlier in this module, that we have to use that for our plan. That's the whole point. I mean, the problem is a lot of times, we require teachers to do the FBA and the BIP, but really it's just paperwork. They just do an FBA and they just write up the BIP on whatever is convenient, what they've done before. But this is about really following the guidelines of special education and supporting students who have challenging behaviors in school that interfere with their learning and the learning of others. So we can look at each area of our competing pathways model as a column for considering intervention. So here we have the blanks. We got to think of how we're going to address the motivating operation. How do we address the discriminative stimulus, the trigger? How do we accommodate and teach the student so that the behavior can happen? And then how are we going to differentially reinforce? So pause the video, if you will, and think about, what would you do for Pete? What are some ideas that you have? Okay, we're back. Here are some ideas that I had. Because Pete seems to be motivated to get attention because he doesn't get a lot of attention, he doesn't have social skills, doesn't have a lot of friends, his friends are not school, then maybe we need to think about the 4 Ps. And that means that we're going to try to increase the students. Consider public relations, proficiency, power, and philanthropy. Does that ring a bell? For public relations, you have to ask yourself, what skills can I give the student to better help him or her relate to others socially? For power, I might use a social autopsy to help the student understand where things might have gone wrong. For proficiency, we might need to beef up some academic areas for the student or give them some advanced prep on the content of the class or the lesson. And with philanthropy, it's good to have the student do something for others. It raises self-esteem to help others less fortunate. We also can consider non-contingent attention, making sure the student has opportunities to receive attention at any given time, so that doesn't have to use profanity in order to get it. You've learned about non-contingent reinforcement on the resource page of this module. You can encourage parents to set up play dates so he gets attention after school and he has opportunities to play with his friends when he's not at school, so he doesn't need to do it in school so much. And then you want to incentivize school attendance so that everyone's there, so he has multiple people to have as friends. How about the SD? So we're saying this really happens whenever he gets specific instructions to complete independent seat work, no choice, or whole group instruction. So what can we do? Well, I really want you to always think, like, would a high P request sequence work for this student? We need him to get started. So yes, a high P request sequence would be appropriate here to get him into the pattern of getting this work done and getting into that sort of learning environment. You want to be sure you're offering choices of assignment or the order of completion. You offer choice to work with partners, and that way he not only gets choice, but he has opportunity to have peer attention while he's working. And then you always want to make sure you're scaffolding your assignments and giving it smaller pieces at a time. Now, what we want him to do is either ask for attention properly or just get his work done. So what can we do? Well, we can set up some peer tutoring systems so that he can work with peers and get tutoring to make sure the work is such that he can do it. Create social skills groups or a lunch bunch to teach him those social skills that he needs. We need to teach him a strategy to complete the work so that he can self-manage. Perhaps one that has a checklist put on his desk, stay on task, finish assignments without complaints or making inappropriate comments. And then the teacher will check off each step, or you teach the student to check off each step in order to earn a reinforcer. And that leads us to, how are we going to differentially reinforce the student's behavior? Well, we want to use a reinforcer menu. We want to offer attention in the reinforcer menu. Why? Because that's a function-based reinforcer. We know he wants attention, so it should be something that he would work for. You want to reinforce he completes that strategy check sheet, that self-management. You want to put the attention for the inappropriate behavior under extinction, so you incentivize peers ignoring profanity outbursts, and you want to advise all adults to also ignore the profanity. Those are just some of my ideas. I'm curious what yours were. So here's a blank template. You could type right into this and submit this as part of your behavior intervention plan. It can ease up on a lot of the text that you have to write to describe what's going to happen. Visuals are always good for people looking at documents. So the last piece is monitoring your intervention success. So here's an example that you saw when you did the FBA IRIS module. Baseline data are data that have been collected prior to the intervention. So we know where the student is starting, and we can adjust our mastery criteria based on where they're at and where we want them to be. We also need to know that the intervention is working, because if it's not, we need to change our paths. We don't have time to waste with these students, especially if behaviors are interfering with learning or potentially dangerous. David was having off-task behavior, and they decided that a fair pair would work for this, meaning that if he wasn't off task, he was on task, and that would be the replacement behavior. So that's a really easy way to collect data, meaning what if you collect off task data, the opposite of amount of time would be on task. So you can do that easily all at once. So David's problem behavior during the baseline condition was high and fairly stably high, right? It's not a really variable. It just varies about 10 to 20% of the time that is different from day to day. But it's high, meaning he is off task almost all of the time, and he's on task very little amount of time. So once you put your plan in place, once you know your behaviors, you have them defined, you have some baseline data, you start putting your plan in place, and you want to each day collect that exact same data and continue to monitor that line. Now I know we're only doing one line. We're doing a one line for one behavior on one graph and one line on a second graph. It's possible to do 2 lines, and that's up to you if you want to figure out how to do that. But you can do this on 2 different lines. But once the intervention starts, you have your condition change line, and you have your label for your new intervention condition, and you watch the data change as the intervention is put into place, and it goes to where David is almost always on task and rarely off task. So you'll be hypothesizing that data when you put your PBS Part 3 behavior plan in place. And the last thing that you really need to always think about with any intervention is generalization and maintenance. So in order to focus on that, you need to provide training on the replacement behavior skill in a variety of settings, multiple people in different contexts. We've already talked about generalization, but this is just going to review, make sure you understand this needs to go in your plan. So if you use the same antecedents and consequences across different settings, it's going to encourage generalization for the student to say, hey, wherever I go, this behavior is the same one that's expected and reinforced. The more natural your consequences can be, the more likely the behavior change is going to maintain and generalize to different settings, because you want natural reinforcers, because that's what everyone is most likely going to give if they don't really have the plan in their hands. Natural consequences in school are usually verbal praise, good grades, and sometimes at younger grades, token systems, but generally just being able to be successful in the traditional ways. But another reason why we like to put self-management procedures in place is because we can do self-evaluation and they can monitor their progress. And if they meet a goal, they can say, hey, good job, pat themselves on the back. And that's the most natural and most generalizable reinforcement we can get. And also, you're going to be putting in your plan to thin the schedule of reinforcement in your plan. And that is another important way to help this behavior change maintain and generalize, because the less often the student's requiring a reinforcer, then the more likely it's going to maintain without reinforcement down the road. That's what I have to say about that. Are there any questions? Email me. See ya. Take care.